I don't know, but then we were a kid on a bike.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Did he warn you? Yeah, no? Surprise, he warned you. He warned the people paying attention. Nice to be with you this morning. So if you didn't hear, Pastor Keselke is working on confirmation with the confirmation kids today, and then next Sunday is confirmation, so we'll be working with them then. So you're stuck with me twice unless you want to leave. You know where the doors are. The doors are still in the same place. We painted them. They're still there.
I came for the coffee and donuts.
Coffee and donuts, yes, those are always there. You should have in front of you lesson 6, Romans chapter 4. If you don't have that, go ahead and grab that. If you like to write stuff down, there should be a pen around on the tables on either side. And let's begin our study with prayer. I should turn this on, right? That's a phone.
Is it green?
There we go.
Okay.
How we doing?
Yeah, there we go.
All right, very good. Good morning, people online. All right, let's begin with prayer. Lord, for this new day full of your grace and mercy, we thank you. For the opportunity to be in your house, to hear you speak to us through your word, we thank you. For the friends that we have here to study your word with, we thank you. Amen. Lesson 6, Romans chapter 5. So Romans chapter 3, that we're righteous by faith, right? That's what you went through, finished up last week. So the week before. Last week was Easter, you're right. So righteousness by faith is the topic of chapter 3. So chapter 4, the introduction there, I'll just quick read the introduction, we'll read the verses in a second. If you want to win an argument, the best way is to quote the words of someone your opponent respects. That's what Paul does here. The Jews respected Abraham and David. Think of his audience. Did you talk about Paul's audience in Rome, who he's writing to? Did you talk about that at all? Who he got there in Rome? He didn't? You probably did. You weren't paying attention, I know. So you probably have a mix. You've got Gentiles there, but you also have Jewish people who are Christians. And so when he starts talking about Abraham and David, Jewish ears perk up. So if they didn't get this righteousness by faith thing, they're going to get it now because he's appealing to Abraham and David, highly respected people. But then the Gentiles are going to get in there too, and he's going to get everybody included here in chapter 4. But that's why he's using the examples of Abraham and David as we go forward. So it's set up so you got all the verses on the last page, right? Last page is verses 1 through 8. What then will we say that Abraham, our forefather, discovered according to the flesh? If indeed Abraham had been justified by works, he would have had a reason to boast, but not before God. For what does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now, to a person who works, his pay is not counted as a gift, but as something owed. But to the person who does not work, but believes in the God who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited to him as righteousness. This is exactly what David says about the blessed state of the person to whom God credits righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will never count against him. So he's got them both up front. We'll talk about that. Verses 1 through 3. Refresh your memory on the story of Abraham's life Well, let's do that. Let's do that first. Things about Abraham's life that you recall, and then we'll get the context of that. Abraham is important because what happened to him? What did he do? What? You know Abraham, right? The father of believers. I know you're not Jewish, but he's a big deal. Abraham, you've heard? Gary?
God said, there's land, it's for you, it's for your descendants.
Yep.
The next morning, he got up and left.
Yeah. So this obedience to God from the very beginning. He's living in what? Ur of the Chaldees. So he's living over there. God calls him, just like you said, to this promised land. He gets up, he goes. What else do you know about Abraham? What?
Well, he was, I don't know whether he was of another faith or God just called him and brought him to faith
Yeah.
in the first place.
Yeah.
And he gave him his promise.
Yeah. We got no history on him before that, but God called him anyway. So this faithful response. Sandy, was your hand up or was it the same thing? Same thing? Yep, great. So you remember maybe the offering of his son Isaac, which God pulled back on the last minute, testing his faith. It's a big event. Goes down to Egypt during a famine. He loved his wife so much that what?
Passed her off.
He passed her off his sister. Yeah, this is my sister. So that's not such a great thing. Twice, yeah, he did it twice. Yeah, not a great thing. Weird story of the animals. Remember that at all? Yeah.
Well, actually, there were several occasions when God came and offered Abraham the promise of blessing. And this was one of those occasions. And he made a contract with Abraham that actually turned out to be a one-sided contract. And usually it's, if you do this, I'll do that. But when they got the animals all laid out on the ground and he walked in between them, God said, guess what? It's all yours. You don't have to do anything. I'm going to bless you.
A one-sided covenant. That is in, I don't know, I think I wrote it down, some chapter. It's some chapter of Genesis where that occurred. I should have written weird covenant something. I don't know. It could be 13 through 15, somewhere in there. By the way, if you want to read about Abraham, you start at Genesis 12 and run through chapter 25. So you can get the whole history, but there are these things. Remember, he doesn't have an heir, has the promise of an heir, thinks he's got to take it into his own hands and get an heir, and so he does. God says no, and then he does give him the son. Then you've got the test of his faith on the mountain, the sacrifice, and so God. Deb said God gave this promise to him that he would have his own land, and not just the land, but you might have said it, but I don't know. The Savior would come through him. The people, like, yes, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Father of many nations. Abraham means father of many nations. And the promise of the Savior coming through him. So a bunch of big deal with Abraham, father of believers. Jewish people knew this, loved him for it. And so, yeah, where am I going? Oh yeah, what's the context of Genesis 15, verse 6? It got mentioned quickly here. Greg is frantically on his phone looking it up on Bible Gateway. I have great peripheral, Greg. Did you find it or no?
Well, it's what you just quoted earlier. It's Rob lost it.
That's okay. I kind of called him. Oh, I usually don't do that, but I saw him working.
Abraham believed the Lord and credited to his righteousness.
That verse. And the context is he thinks he's going to have to give his estate to the servant. Eliezer, yeah. He thinks he's going to have to do that. And so God drags him outside and says, look at the stars. These are your descendants. So it's the promise again. Deb said he did it several times with Abraham, told him the promise. So that's the context of this. Abram believed in the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. This is a big deal. The end of chapter 4, we're going to discover why, in what way Abraham's faith in God's promise parallels our faith in Jesus. So we don't have to get into that. But God promised him a great nation when he was troubled by the fact that he had no child, had no heir. So God gives him the promise again. Verses 4 and 5, some say that justification is a process that extends over the course of a Christian's life. In this sense, justification is defined as to make a person more and more righteous. How does verse 5 prove that justification means to declare righteous? And you have a hint there. Link together the thoughts in the following phrases. Does not work, believes, and faith is credited. Thoughts about that?
Well, if we were to work for it, then it would be owed to us.
Mhm.
But since it's a gift, it's grace. He didn't owe it.
So what about the process? You like the picture of anybody? I'm not calling on you specifically unless you want to, but you like the idea of a process of justification?
No.
Yeah, you better say no. Unless you're just confused, then we'll talk it through. But I mean, that is the answer is no. Yeah.
It's because it's being tied to faith. It's being tied to faith, not tied to your works, or there's no indication that your faith has to be at a certain point for you to
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah, some people teach this. Have you heard this, or maybe you believed it in the past even? This idea that justification is a process. You become a better and better Christian, like as if you could be. Well, it would totally be by works, right? If this was the case, if I could be more and more acceptable to God, or to the point where God is happy with me, that would be a process. That is not what God says at all. You talk about a gift, and you talk about grace, which means undeserved love. Very different than that. Sometimes we talk about what as a process? Not justification, but sanctification. Only in that you can grow in godly living. God would have us grow in godly living. It's one of the reasons you're in here, to know his word better so that you can apply it to your life better. We have growth in that way. But justification, being made right with God, that happens when God gives it. It's a one-time thing. It is not a process. So very different than that idea. Verses 6 through 8. Also, Paul also quotes from David to prove salvation by faith. This is Psalm 32. I actually wanted to, because I think you'll recognize it. So wanted to find it and share it. And I am certain we use some of this during Holy Week services. So this is Psalm 32. Can I read the whole thing? Sure I can. It's not that long. Blessed is he whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord does not count against him, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let everyone who is godly pray to you while you may be found. Surely when the mighty waters rise, they will not reach him. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you and watch over you. Do not be like the horse or the mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. Many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love surrounds the man who trusts in him. Rejoice in the Lord and be glad, you righteous. Sing, all you who are upright in heart. You remember lots of that, lots of parts of that, many of you do. And so you've got this piece of that there in the Psalm here, where is it? Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will never count against him. So you've got those verses from Psalm 32. Anybody know what Hebrew parallelism is? Some of you ladies better know. Women's Bible study ladies better know. I'm not going to call on you, but what's Hebrew? Did you have it?
Well, it says it one way and then it says it again it's the same, but it's in a little different way.
Yeah, so it's two sentences that say the same thing, but a little different way. If you read the Psalms and you know that, like, you'll perk up every time you see it, like I did when I was doing the prep for this. It's parallelism. So it's a mark of Hebrew poetry, and there are different types, but you can see it in here. So blessed, that's going to be in the first line. In the second line, it's parenthetical in the second line. So you can do this if you want. Circle blessed or blessed are those whose lawless deeds, underline, forgiven, underline twice. Circle, underline twice. And then, blessed, again understood, are those whose sins, underline once, covered, underline twice. See it? It's kind of easy, but will help. Sometimes it will help you in your understanding of what's being said. Yeah.
Sometimes one line will give a shade that will help you interpret the other line a little better.
Yes. Do you have one in mind?
I don't.
Okay, that's fine. Kathy said one line will often help you to understand what's being said in the other line. One that you might know is fear and revere. Yeah, Deb?
Don't these two lines kind of do that? The second line, verse 8 says, blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will never count against him. So it's like, whoa, never. That's great.
Yeah.
So they all kind of go.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even do the last line, did I? There are three of them. Blessed, sin, not counted, never counted. Yeah, so it, some of them kind of go and hook and explain. Some of them are just paired words. So that's one of the Psalms is where you hear fear, and you find out that fear means to revere, not be afraid. Yeah.
I did just think of one. Surely I was sinful from birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. So you can't just take the birth one out and say
Right.
they were perfect before they were born. It goes even further back.
Yeah, so it explains the other one. So just, it's a little side thing. It's not in the study, I know, but it is now. So if you're interested in poetry and Hebrew poetry and understanding the Psalms and learning like that, you'll find that all over the place. So yeah, what were we supposed to talk about this? So we're going to collect, Pastor Kiselke put this part in here. So he may have other things in mind for down the road, but he talks about collecting some phrases that differentiate between salvation by keeping the law and salvation by faith. Like, we're going to see that throughout here. We may not always come back and write it down, but you can. So you got a couple phrases. We get what we deserve, and we receive a gift. Anybody want to describe what that first one means? We get what we deserve. When do we get what we deserve in this context of what he's writing about? Jeffrey?
When we're in unbelief.
When what?
When we're in unbelief.
Ultimately, when we are in unbelief, we do. He's got a particular context here, Sandy.
The consequence of our sin.
Consequence of our sin.
Because we've done something, therefore, this is going to happen to us. You can't avoid it sometimes because you sin.
Okay. Other thoughts? Deb?
I don't know if this makes sense, but the verses say that Abraham believed and it was credited him as righteousness. So it's like you've got a ledger here. And if you keep God's law, then you'll get paid with his favor. But Abraham did not always obey God's law, but he believed, and in that what he owed column was put his faith in that, and that was his righteousness. And so now God does owe him that. And then in our perspective, where we've seen Jesus come and we knew how the whole Messiah promise thing turned out already. Abraham did not know how it was gonna work out detail for detail. But we can see that in Jesus, we get credit for having done it all because of faith.
Exactly
Is that
right.
weird?
No, spot on. I can't repeat all of that on the other side. But the idea of two ledgers, sin would be on this. This is where I really wanted to go with this. That first line is the left column that you were talking about, the law. We get what we deserve. If you're trying to live by the law, you said Abraham couldn't do it because he sinned. We can't do it either. So if you're trying to live by the law, you're going to get what you deserve. Punishment. Separation from God eternally. So that's the left side. If you're trying to earn it, you're going to get what you deserve. Grace is the other side. We receive a gift. Then we don't get what we deserve. We get something we didn't deserve. You want to be in the right column. In case that was confusing at all, you want to be on the faith, grace side of things. So couple phrases to keep in mind. Abraham and David lived by faith. They were given God's righteousness as a gift, and they rejoiced in God's mercy and forgiveness. Have you ever asked the question, how were Old Testament believers or people saved? Do you remember ever asking that question? Because Jesus, like Abraham's back here, and then Jesus is here. Close enough? Cross? Close enough. And then New Testament, people here, like, oh, they can look at Jesus, see what he does. You said something about that. So they can look back. Zane?
Well, didn't they have a bunch of looking forward to Christ type like sacrifices and all that stuff? They even have like scapegoats.
Yeah.
So they symbols of Jesus taking away the sins.
Yeah, so Zane's pointing out that they had all sorts of sacrifices that looked forward to Jesus, but when you say they had lots of sacrifices, I say they had to do the sacrifices. They had to do it and do it and do it. It was never enough. That's law, right? So some people say, well, how were they saved? If Jesus hadn't come and done it yet, Stan?
Well, they had the prophets proclaiming this is gonna happen, so they could look forward to it, even though they didn't live that long.
Yeah, I thought that's what you were going to say, prophecies, but you went sacrifices. So they also had that. So they were looking forward because of these things. This part tells you, like if you're confused, I get asked this all the time. That's why I'm asking if you've ever wondered about this. Like, how were they saved back then? Jesus wasn't there. If anybody ever asks you that, I think it sounds like most of you have the answer. But you can also go to Romans chapter 4. Now you know where you can go that explains, oh, Abraham was saved by faith. That sounds a little bit like Barb and Pat and Nancy. They're saved by faith too. The thing that I write on the board is so simple, but it helps. If Jesus is here, Old Testament people are here, they're looking forward and they believe that he's coming. Barb and Pat and Nancy live way over here, but they look back on when Jesus came, and because of their faith in him, they too are saved. It all centers on Christ, and both have to do with faith. So you get Paul explaining Abraham was saved by faith, and so was David. Yeah.
I like that, that passage talks about Abraham with the covenant of circumcision, where we can parallel that to baptism, that the faith, or.
Hang on to that for a minute. Make sure we come back to it, because I think this next section leans that direction. I don't know if we cover the topic, but, well, we kind of do. So let's read 9 through 12. Is that where we are? 9 through 12. Yeah. Now then, does this blessing apply only to the circumcised or also to the uncircumcised? Okay, right out the gate. When it says circumcised, think those who follow the law. Okay? don't just think of the procedure. Think of, oh, they had to do this because it was the law. So think those who had the law, Jewish people, Old Testament. Okay, now then, does this blessing apply only to the circumcised, those who follow the law, or also to the uncircumcised, the people who don't have the law? To be sure, we maintain that faith was credited to Abraham as righteousness. So then, under what circumstances was it credited to him? Was he circumcised or uncircumcised at that time? He was not circumcised, but uncircumcised. And he received the mark of circumcision as the seal of the righteousness by faith that was already his while he was uncircumcised. So, Abraham is the father of all the uncircumcised people who believe, so that righteousness would also be credited to them. He is also the father of the circumcised people, who are not merely circumcised, but also walk in the footsteps of the faith our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. I hope I read that with enough inflection and emphasis that it made it clear what Paul's doing. I know sometimes when we read the Bible, we just kind of breeze through some things, and we might not catch all the details. Maybe you read carefully. Sometimes we breeze over, and you might over this. But this is a big deal. How does Paul use the chronology of Abraham's life to prove that the gospel was intended for the Gentiles as well as the Jews? So you're answering a couple things here, right? You're answering about you thinking about Abraham having faith and righteousness before he was circumcised, and you're thinking about Gentiles as well as the Jews, so even later on as Paul's writing. Thoughts or explanation of what Paul's saying there? What's his main point? What?
He was credited with faith when he was a Gentile,
Yeah.
before he was called.
Before he was there was no law, and he was still righteous by faith. This tells you you're not saved by obeying the law, right? This is one of Paul's points. You're not saved by doing all the right things and avoiding all the bad things. That's not how you're saved. Here's an example. Abraham believed that he was saved before there ever was a thing. Do you know how, so Abraham was like 75 years old when he was called. He was like 100 when he's circumcised. He's a believer before that ever happens. And so he's making the point, well, you tell me, what point is he making then? For the Romans, the ones who are receiving the letter, or at least some of the Romans. Yeah?
It wasn't the circumcision that made him justified.
Yeah. It wasn't obeying that act of the law, or any act of the law, that made him a believer. And so for you, it's not obedience to the law either. He's going to do this again. Another couple verses, I think, at the end, maybe the end of the next section or so. He's going to do the same kind of thing. That Abraham was a Gentile, but still justified by faith. Verse 12, Paul beautifully expresses how Gentiles and Jews should view themselves as spiritual descendants of Abraham. Let me ask you a question here. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes, so don't pop your hand up in the air yet. How do you feel as a non-Jew reader of Paul? Take a minute and come up with 2 words that describe how you feel after reading that as a Gentile believer. I might give you 30 seconds-ish. 2 words, how you feel. You need to rely on the person next to you, go right ahead. If you want to fight about which 2 words you want to present, that's fine. How do you feel as a non-Jewish reader of the Apostle Paul there? Do you have, you can give one or two words, Gary?
Included.
Included. Nice. I'm gonna take some notes. Because there's gonna be a lot of words, I think. Included. Another word. Yeah, just give one. Joyce?
Hopeful.
Hopeful. Was that mine? Nope. Right again.
Special.
Special.
Thankful.
Thankful. Left side. Yep.
Chosen?
Chosen. Right side. Somebody blurted it out.
Invited?
What?
Invited?
Invited. Left side. Don't lose.
This is a contest.
Oh my goodness. Sheep and goats. Yeah. Blessed. Left side.
Confident.
Confident. Right side. Acceptable. Accepted. Acceptable. Because of grace. Left side. Did I see hand going up again? Nope. You're gonna fail me. Good enough. I had, what did I have? Yeah, mine is really sanctified. Great! I also had relieved. You can imagine that, right? If you're impressed by these Jewish people and they try to keep the law, and Paul was a Pharisee, a Jew among Jews, and all that bragging stuff. And I look at him and I look at them and then I look at me. Like, I'm relieved to hear that I am saved not by keeping the law, and neither are they. And they are accepted by God, and so am I. That's why I put relieved. But you have a whole list of great ones. The gospel is for Jews and Gentiles, for all who believe, as Abraham did before he received the covenant of circumcision. That was a covenant thing. By the way, other cultures had that, but they didn't have the promise attached to it. That was the unique feature, that God used this as a seal and symbol of the faith that they had in him. So just a little different thing. Next page. Are we doing it the same? Am I on the same? Did I lay mine out the same as yours? Are we on the next page? 13 through 17? Looks good. 13 through 17. What? Make sure I don't skip something because I laid mine out like good stuff. 13 through 17. Indeed, the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not given to Abraham or his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness that is by faith. To be sure, if people are heirs by the law, faith is empty, and the promise is nullified. For law brings wrath. Where there is no law, there is no transgression. For this reason, the promise is by faith, so that it may be according to grace, and may be guaranteed to all of Abraham's descendants, not only to the one who is a descendant by law, but also to the one who has the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. That's what the name Abraham means father of many nations. So, in this section, Paul shows the sharp contrast between living under the law versus living under faith. Verse 13. Look at verse 13. See if you can fill in the blanks. I'll give you a second to do that. Blessings come to the law says, blessings come to those who keep the law. That one wasn't that. Faith says, blessings come to those who are what by what? Saved by faith. I would even say righteous by faith, saved by faith. That's what faith says. Verse 14. Take a look at those. Which one's right? Which do you pick for promises worthless? Law or faith? Law. Choose law. That nullifies. Did he use that word? Nullify? You should have if he didn't. Oh, there he is. End of verse 12. There's nullify. If you're trying to obey the law, the promise is nullified. You're pushing the promise and God's grace away because you're saying, I'll do this. I'll take care of this. So the promise is worthless if you're living by the law. Faith is worthless by which one? Law or faith? Law again. Because Selfie's trying to be tricky. Yeah, totally blaming us. I didn't realize that. Yeah, you see the trouble with the law. Faith isn't enough, is the sense, because the law is important. If you're a person who wants to obey the law is the thing. Faith doesn't really matter. You got to do, and you don't need a promise because you have to do. We don't like the law. 15. Walk through those. I'll give you just a little bit longer to pull those out of there. There is sin with which one? Law or faith? Law. There is no sin with law or faith? Faith. There is God's wrath with law or faith? There is no wrath with law or faith? See, you guys know what you're doing. You know that there are people that are still confused about how they're saved, even though they talk a lot like you do. Just keep that in mind as we go through this. If some of the answers seem simplistic, they might not to some of you. They might not be simplistic. But some of you, they are. But remember that not everybody has your background. Not everybody knows scripture like that. Sometimes they've been taught something different. So at least you have a place to go for this too when you're trying to talk about this and maybe help somebody. Verse 16, do that one too. Which one is by works? Law. Which one is by faith? Faith. Faith. Which one has no guarantee? The law. Which one is guaranteed? Faith. Yeah. Works and faith. Abraham lived in the realm of faith, and so he is the father of all who lived in that realm by faith. That was pretty clear in that section too, right? As we read through that, if you're either one, a Jew or a Gentile, hearing that is going to find great comfort. Because if you thought you were under the law, and then you hear, hey, I'm not under the law, God saved you without that, like you feel good about that as a Jew. But as a Gentile, it's what we said before. You hear, oh, I'm saved too, because God gave me that. Like it's another great section. So he's kind of hammering this point home to them. And nobody should come out of there with a misunderstanding about that. And about Abraham being the father of all. If you were a Jew, you could be pretty snooty. Or so I've heard from the Bible. From the Bible. Not like now, but in the Bible, they could be a little snooty. God's people. Because they felt superior. They were God's chosen people, but that didn't make them better. In fact, they were pretty bad a lot of the time. Testament to God's grace. So this levels the playing field, right? God treats everybody the same. Not under law, but given grace. So just one last thing before we go. In the box, you have, it would be unbearable to live under the law. I have a question. You can talk to somebody next to you about this, so I'm going to give you a second. Why? In your words, it would be unbearable to live under the law. Why is that? Take a second. Why would it be unbearable to live under the law, Sandy?
You would never know if you had done enough.
The first thing I had, you'd never know if it was enough. How could you?
Because you're always screwing up.
Yeah, because you're always screwing up. So like, how do I tip the scales? How do I get more of this stuff and less of that stuff? I would never be sure. I could think I'm better, but I wouldn't really know. Yeah.
I actually think it would be unbearable because I know that I failed.
Yeah.
100% of the time, because God demands perfection, because He is perfection.
Yeah.
He sets that bar. We can't be God, we can't be perfect. So I know I failed right out the gates.
No, I feel right up. I think that capsulizes my second answer. Guilt. Like, I know I'm guilty. I cannot escape that. Was there anything else over here? Yeah.
Just thinking about Martin Luther.
Yeah.
He was trying.
Yeah.
With everything he had.
Yep.
And he was in despair.
Yeah. Yeah. Luther went through this. Lots of people today go through this too. Jeffrey, was your hand up or no?
Because our sin is always before us.
Our sin is always before us. I'm always conscious of it. So, yeah, it would be unbearable to think that I've got to do all the right things or else I'm going to hell. Yeah.
Martin Luther going to confession. Every time he finished and walked out, he turned around with some more.
Yeah. Yeah. And his father confessor was kind of sick of it. You can read about that. I have one other question before we stop. Peace only comes when we live under grace by faith. Why is that? We can answer this one together. Why is it that peace only comes when we live under grace by faith? Oh, okay, you should know this. You're assured of your eternal salvation. How else would you answer that? If there was another way here.
Well, as far as the law goes, he's already done it for us. We don't have to do it.
Yeah. The way I said that is stress is gone. If Jesus did it all and we have salvation, there's nothing I have to do. I am relieved. I am stress-free when it comes to that. We should stop there. Yeah, that's a good enough spot. We can stop there. So next time, picking it up at verses 17 and following. See you over in church if I didn't see you already.